I never thought my own son would choose a bunch of hippies over his own mother, but here we are. It all started when Jonah quit his great job to become what he called a food influencer. He was posting these ridiculous videos about saffron risotto being some kind of revolution. When his girlfriend Madison finally got smart and left him for a real man with a dental practice, I simply told him the truth. No wonder she left you. She wants a husband, not a hashtag. Was I harsh? Maybe, but someone had to say it. Instead of thanking me for my honesty, he disappeared, changed his name to Elder Flame. I know I rolled my eyes too and moved to some commune in Oregon where they only eat food grown nearby and live stream their therapy sessions. It's been a whole year of silence now. The worst part, I saw Madison at Trader Joe's last week. She's thriving without him. I'm the victim here, but nobody sees it that way. I never imagined my son would choose herbs over me. But that's exactly what happened when Jonah, my sensible marketing executive son, decided he was meant to be a food influencer. Charleston society has certain expectations. I'd built my reputation methodically, pioneering research in cultural anthropology, a distinguished professorship, 3 well-respected books on post-colonial identity. My home in the historic district hosted dinner parties where conversations about systemic inequalities flowed as smoothly as the wine I imported from black-owned South African vineyards. My other children understood the importance of stability alongside progressive values. My eldest daughter is an environmental lawyer. My youngest runs diversity initiatives for a Fortune 500 company. Then there was Jonah, bright, handsome, and until recently, sensibly employed with excellent benefits. "Mom, I've given my notice," he announced over Sunday brunch. "I'm going to pursue cooking full-time." I maintained my composure, though my mimosa glass betrayed me with a slight tremble. Cooking, as what, a chef? Not exactly. More like a content creator focused on food justice and accessibility. I nodded as if this made perfect sense, while mentally calculating how long his savings would last before he'd come to his senses. Madison, his girlfriend of 4 years, sat beside him looking uncomfortable. She was perfect. Dental hygienist, volunteer work with at-risk youth, family money but not flashy about it. The kind of woman who could help Jonah maintain his position in our social ecosystem. "Well," I said finally, "I suppose you could always return to marketing when this experiment runs its course." His face clouded. "It's not an experiment, Mom. I've been thinking about this for years." "Years?" I laughed lightly. "Darling, you got an air fryer last Christmas." Madison touched his arm in that soothing way she had. "Jonah has been taking night classes at the Culinary Institute. He's really quite talented." I hadn't known this. The realization that my son had been planning a major life change without consulting me was unsettling. Still, I maintained my smile. "How resourceful of you. And what does this content creation pay exactly?" "It's not about the money right away," Jonah explained with infuriating patience. "I'm building a platform around ethical food sourcing and traditional techniques that have been marginalized by industrial food systems." I resisted the urge to remind him that I had literally written a book on cultural appropriation. If anyone understood marginalized traditions, it was me. "How fascinating," I said instead. "And your rent, your health insurance?" "I've saved enough for 6 months," he said. "By then, I should have sponsorships and ad revenue." I nodded again, not believing a word. This was clearly a quarter-life crisis, probably triggered by turning 30 next year. It would resolve itself when reality set in. It did not resolve itself. Months passed. My friends began asking awkward questions at gallery openings and fundraisers. "Evangeline, how's Jonah's little cooking venture going?" I deflected with practiced grace while watching his Instagram following grow. His content shifted from simple recipe videos to lengthy discourses on decolonizing the palate and dismantling capitalist food structures. Concepts I'd literally taught at university, but somehow sounded ridiculous coming from my son between shots of fermented vegetables. His appearance changed too. His clean-cut look gave way to shoulder-length hair and clothes that appeared to be made from hemp. When I suggested a trim before my department's annual gala, He launched into a monologue about Western beauty standards that nearly made me spill my morning coffee. Mom, I'm not interested in conforming to an aesthetic that exists primarily to sell products and reinforce status hierarchies. It's a haircut, Jonah, not a political statement. Everything is political, he insisted. Especially food and bodies. I found myself avoiding certain friends who might ask about him. When forced to speak of Jonah, I framed his choices as exploring his options or consulting on food ethics, phrases that maintained my reputation as a supportive mother while disguising my growing alarm. Then came the financial crisis. 3 months into his career change, Jonah called asking if he could borrow money for rent. What happened to your 6-month savings? I asked. I invested in equipment. Professional lighting, cameras, editing software. I transferred the money immediately, along with a gentle reminder that good investments yield returns. He promised to pay me back within a month. It took 3, and he sold his car to do it. Just as I was formulating a careful intervention, catastrophe struck in the form of a phone call from Madison. She was in tears. We broke up, she managed between sobs. Jonah says he wants to explore non-monogamy and intentional living. He wants to what? I nearly dropped my phone. He says conventional relationship structures perpetuate capitalist notions of ownership, and that ethical polyamory is more aligned with his values now. I closed my eyes, feeling a migraine bloom behind my left temple. Madison, dear, I am so sorry. This is clearly just a phase. That's what I thought too, but it's been months of him changing, becoming someone I don't recognize. Last week he spent our entire date night talking about the revolutionary potential of communal dining. I made soothing noises while inwardly calculating the damage to my social standing. Madison's family were significant donors to the university. Her father golfed with the dean. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a networking disaster. Perhaps some space would be good for both of you, I suggested, already planning to speak with Jonah immediately. Space isn't the issue, Madison said, her voice steadying. I met someone else, David. He's an orthodontist. 6 months later, I received an elegant cream-colored envelope. Madison was engaged to her orthodontist. I sent flowers and a note. So pleased you found someone on your level. Meanwhile, Jonah's phase intensified. His Instagram now featured terms like food sovereignty and community mutual aid. He began hosting pop-up dinners in community gardens and abandoned warehouses, serving dishes with names like decolonized kimchi and resistance risotto. When I asked if these events made any money, he looked at me as if I'd suggested serving endangered species. It's not about profit, Mom. It's about creating accessible spaces where food brings people together across socioeconomic barriers. So no, I translated. It doesn't make money, he shrugged. We cover costs and pay everyone fairly, that's enough. Everyone except yourself, I pointed out. I have everything I need. He did not, from my perspective, have what he needed. His apartment, which I visited unannounced one afternoon, was sparsely furnished but overflowing with cooking equipment, fermentation crocks, and plants growing in every available space. The air smelled of yeast and vinegar. He seemed thinner, though energetic in a frenetic way that concerned me. The final humiliation came at my own dinner party. I'd invited the new department chair and several promising doctoral candidates, along with key donors. Jonah promised to attend, even agreeing to wear proper attire. He arrived 45 minutes late, wearing linen pants he'd clearly made himself and a shirt with visible mending. Worse, he'd brought an uninvited guest, a young woman with unruly hair and multiple ear piercings who introduced herself as Willow, but my ancestors knew me as Maple. Before I could recover from this introduction, Jonah presented me with a ceramic dish. I brought saffron risotto as revolutionary praxis, he announced, too loudly. My guests turned to stare as he placed the dish in the center of my carefully arranged table. Saffron has been a site of colonial exploitation for centuries, he continued, apparently oblivious to my tight smile. By sourcing it ethically and honoring the traditional preparation methods, we reclaim it as a tool for connection rather than oppression. Dr. Haywood, the new chair, peered at the dish with anthropological interest. Fascinating perspective. though I believe risotto is Italian, while saffron's exploitation occurred primarily in Middle Eastern and North African contexts. Jonah nodded eagerly. Exactly, this dish represents the problematic nature of cultural fusion under capitalism. By acknowledging that tension and sourcing each ingredient ethically, we begin to heal those historical wounds. I laughed lightly, trying to redirect. My son is quite passionate about food politics. More wine, anyone? But it was too late. As my colleagues picked politely at the risotto, which I had to admit was delicious, Jonah launched into a monologue about how traditional dining hierarchies reinforced oppressive systems. The very concept of courses, of certain foods being appetizers and others being entrees, reflects Western priority structures that devalue communal eating practices from other cultures. Jonah, I interjected, perhaps we could discuss the Dean's new diversity initiative instead. He turned to me with genuine confusion. But this is about diversity, Mom. Food is the most fundamental expression of cultural identity. I sipped my wine and watched my reputation dissolve like sea salt. The doctoral candidates were entranced, asking Jonah questions about fermentation techniques and indigenous preservation methods. Willow, but ancestors knew her as Maple, discussed soil health with a major donor. Dr. Haywood took seconds of the risotto. By the time dessert arrived, a vegan cashew cheesecake that Jonah had also brought despite my plans for creme brulee, I'd lost control of my own dinner party. My son had transformed my carefully orchestrated academic networking event into what he would probably call a horizontal knowledge exchange. Later, after the guests had departed with Jonah's Instagram handle and promises to attend his next pop-up dinner, I confronted him in the kitchen. What exactly was that performance about? He looked genuinely confused as he carefully wrapped the leftover cheesecake in beeswax cloth. What performance? The revolutionary rice, the speech about dining hierarchies, bringing a +1 without asking. Willow is my partner, he said simply. One of them anyway, I wanted you to meet her. One of them, my voice rose despite my effort to remain calm. Jonah, what has happened to you? 6 months ago you were on track to make executive by 30. You had Madison, who comes from a good family and was clearly planning a future with you. Now look at you. I gestured to his homemade clothing. You look like you've joined a cult. His expression closed. I'm happier than I've ever been, Mom. I'm doing meaningful work that aligns with my values. Values I taught you, I reminded him. Concepts I literally wrote books about. But there's a difference between academic understanding and throwing away your potential on some misguided crusade against. What lunch? He carefully placed the wrapped cheesecake in my refrigerator. I should go. Thank you for including us tonight. I watched him gather his things, frustration building in my chest. My brilliant son, who could have had anything, choosing instead to become a caricature of enlightenment. Something had to be done before he destroyed his life completely. Sunday dinner, I said firmly. Just you, we need to talk properly. He hesitated, then nodded. Fine, Sunday. As he left with Willow, I began planning my intervention. This phase had gone far enough. It was time for some radical honesty from a mother who knew better. Something had to be done. I invited Jonah to Sunday dinner alone. I prepared his childhood favorite, jerk chicken with my mother's recipe, as emotional leverage. The marinade had to sit overnight, and as I worked the spices into the meat, I rehearsed what I would say to my wayward son. This wasn't just about food or careers, this was about the Calhoun family legacy. 3 generations of academics and professionals, and Jonah wanted to throw it all away for fermented vegetables and Instagram likes. I set my dining room with understated elegance, my grandmother's china, fresh flowers, and a bottle of excellent Merlot. Everything designed to remind him of the world he was abandoning, of quality and tradition and standards. He arrived looking thinner, sporting a beard that belonged on a Victorian poet rather than my son. His clothes were clean but clearly handmade, a linen shirt with imperfect stitching that he probably considered a political statement. You've lost weight, I observed, kissing his cheek. I'm eating better than ever, he said. Just differently. I gestured toward the table. I made your favorite. A flicker of genuine pleasure crossed his face. Mom's jerk chicken, I haven't had that in ages. Some traditions are worth maintaining, I said pointedly. We sat and I poured wine for myself. He declined, requesting water instead. Not drinking any more? I asked lightly. I still enjoy wine occasionally, but I'm practicing mindful consumption, being selective about what I put into my body. I smiled tightly. How virtuous. He took a bite of chicken and closed his eyes briefly. This is amazing. Just like Grandma used to make. I follow her recipe exactly, I said, pleased despite myself. No modern improvements needed. Actually, traditional cooking techniques often are perfect as they are. They evolved over generations to be nutritionally complete and culturally significant. That's a big part of what I'm exploring in my work. I waited until he'd taken several appreciative bites before I began. Darling, we need to talk about your situation. My cooking career is going really well actually, he said, eyes bright. I'm partnering with an urban garden collective next month. We're creating a series about food accessibility in food deserts. Jonah, I set down my fork with precision. This isn't a career, it's a phase, a particularly self-indulgent one. His expression closed like a book. Mom, let me finish. You had stability health care of 401k. You had Madison, who would have made an excellent wife and mother. Now what do you have? A few thousand followers who care more about aesthetics than substance? Recipes that appropriate cultural traditions you have no claim to? That's not what I'm doing at all. No wonder Madison left you, I said, delivering the line I'd rehearsed. She wants a husband, not a hashtag. The silence that followed had weight, texture, density. You know what's interesting? He finally said, his voice unnervingly calm. You spent your entire career writing about respecting indigenous knowledge systems and alternative economic models. But when your own son tries to live those values, it's suddenly a phase. This isn't about my work, I snapped. This is about you playing revolutionary while I subsidized your rent for 3 months last year. That was a loan. I paid you back. After selling your car, another impractical choice. I leaned forward. All this performative rebellion, this gentrified cosplay for confused vegans, it's beneath you. Beneath me. He placed his napkin beside his plate. What exactly do you think is above me, Mom? Working 60 hours a week marketing products nobody needs. Coming home too exhausted to cook real food. Staying in a relationship that looked good on paper but made both of us quietly miserable. Madison is thriving now, I countered. Engaged to someone with ambition and stability. Good for her, I genuinely wish her well, but that life wasn't right for me. And this is communal dinners and I waved my hand dismissively. Intentional living, what does that even mean, Jonah? It sounds like something from a self-help book written by someone without a doctoral degree. He stood up, leaving his plate half finished. Thank you for dinner. Jonah, don't be dramatic, sit down. But he was already walking out. I followed him to the door, increasingly frustrated. This is exactly the problem, I said. You can't even handle a difficult conversation. The real world isn't a safe space, Jonah. People won't coddle your feelings or validate your lifestyle choices. He turned at the door. This isn't about my feelings, it's about respect. You haven't heard a word I've said in months. You've decided my choices are invalid because they don't match your blueprint for my life. Because I know better, because I've lived longer and seen more. Because I'm your mother and I love you. If you loved me, you'd try to understand instead of dismiss. The words stung like a slap. That's unfair. Everything I've done has been for your benefit. I know you believe that, he said quietly. That's what makes this so sad. Then he was gone, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. I wasn't concerned. He'd always been sensitive but quick to forgive. I expected an apologetic text within days, perhaps an admission that he'd overreacted. Then we could have a real conversation about his future. I'd be willing to compromise. Perhaps culinary school would be a more structured approach to his interests. Instead, silence. Complete unyielding silence. I tried calling the next day, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a measured message. Jonah, I think we should continue our conversation when emotions aren't so high. Call me back. He didn't. I texted 3 days later. Your sister is coming for lunch on Saturday. Join us. No response. By the end of the week, I was concerned enough to call Madison, something I would normally consider beneath my dignity. Dr. Calhoun, she answered, surprise evident in her voice. Is everything okay? I'm trying to reach Jonah. He's not responding to my calls or texts. A pause. We haven't spoken in weeks, not since before our last conversation. If you do hear from him, would you let me know? We had a disagreement and I'd like to resolve it. Of course, she said, though her tone suggested she had no expectation of hearing from him. 2 weeks later, his sister called me. Did you know Jonah deleted all his social media? I hadn't known. I checked Instagram where his profile had vanished like smoke. His Facebook, Twitter all gone. Even his LinkedIn profile had been deactivated. Did he say anything to you about this? I asked. Not directly, but Zora mentioned he was talking about digital minimalism. I felt a creeping unease. This wasn't like Jonah, even this new, strange version of him. His online presence had been central to his food justice identity. Has he contacted you? Not since last week. He texted to say he was taking some time away from technology, something about recalibrating his relationship with digital space. It sounded like the kind of pseudo-intellectual nonsense he'd been spouting lately, which was somewhat reassuring. At least he was consistent in his folly. A month after that, a legal notice arrived. Jonah Marcel Calhoun had petitioned to change his name to Elder Flame. I laughed until I realized it wasn't a joke. The document was official, filed with the county court. My son wanted to legally become Elder Flame Calhoun. I called Amara immediately. Did you know about this name change nonsense? Mom, calm down. Calm down. My son wants to be called Elder Flame. This isn't just a phase anymore, it's a breakdown. Or it's a deeply personal choice that has meaning to him, Amara suggested. People change their names for all sorts of reasons. Not to Elder Flame, they don't. Actually, I have a colleague who changed her name to reflect her spiritual practice. This isn't a spiritual practice, I insisted. This is attention-seeking behavior masquerading as enlightenment. Amara sighed. Have you considered that your attitude might be why he's distancing himself from you? I was so taken aback that I ended the call shortly after. My own daughter taking his side in this madness. The betrayal stung. In the weeks that followed, I heard nothing directly from Jonah. Instead, information came in fragments secondhand. A former student emailed, Dr. Calhoun, I thought you'd like to know I ran into your son in Portland. He's looking well and mentioned some exciting food justice work. A colleague mentioned casually, isn't your son involved with that commune in Oregon? My niece attended one of their workshops on fermentation. She said it was transformative. Then came the rumors. Someone who knew someone who followed someone on social media reported that Elder Flame was living in a sustainable community somewhere in rural Oregon. I tried to dismiss it all as exaggeration. Jonah was probably just visiting friends, perhaps working as a cook somewhere to gain experience. The name change was likely a professional pseudonym, not a complete identity shift. Then Zora, my youngest, confirmed it during a video call. He's living at a place called Harmony Hollow, she said. It's not exactly a commune, more like a sustainable agriculture collective with shared housing. Has he joined a cult? I asked bluntly. Zora rolled her eyes. No, Mom, it's a working farm with educational programs. They grow food and teach people about sustainable agriculture. Some members live on site, others just work there. And he's living there permanently? I think so. He seems really happy. Happy, I repeated. Living in some hippie farming commune, calling himself Elder Flame, disconnected from his family and education and potential. That's what passes for happiness these days. Mom, Zora said with that infuriating patience all my children seem to have inherited from their father, maybe your definition of potential doesn't match his. Maybe success doesn't look the same to him as it does to you. Success generally includes indoor plumbing and health insurance, I remarked dryly. They have both, actually. It's not the 1960s. These intentional communities are often quite well organized. I couldn't bear to hear more. I ended the call promising to think about what she'd said, though what I actually thought about was how to bring my son back to his senses. I sent a text. When you're ready to be normal, I'll be here. Love, Mom. No response. I left voicemails that grew increasingly frustrated. Jonah, this has gone far enough. Call me back. Then, I assume you're still alive since your sisters seem to hear from you. The courtesy of a return call would be appreciated. Finally, I don't even know what to call you anymore. This silence is childish and hurtful. Nothing moved him. It was as if the son I'd raised for 29 years had simply vanished, replaced by a stranger with a ridiculous name and incomprehensible values. I found myself avoiding friends who might ask about him. I made vague references to Jonah exploring alternative lifestyles or working on food sustainability projects. I implied he was doing important research for a book or documentary. Anything to avoid admitting that my son had essentially joined a cult and changed his name to something that sounded like a character from a fantasy novel. My colleagues were too polite to press for details, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Dr. Calhoun, pioneering researcher on cultural identity and family systems, unable to maintain a relationship with her own son. The irony was not lost on me. Worse were the questions from extended family. My sister called from Detroit. I hear Jonah's gone full granola. What exactly is going on with that boy? My mother, at 86, still sharp as a tack. Evangeline, what's this I hear about Jonah changing his name? Is he in some kind of trouble? I deflected, minimized, redirected. He's finding himself. It's a career transition. Just a phase, mother. But as weeks turned to months with no contact, I began to fear it wasn't a phase at all. This estrangement was becoming our new normal. My son, who once called me daily for advice on everything from career moves to cooking times for chicken, now existed in a world entirely separate from mine. The holidays approached. Thanksgiving plans were made with a conspicuous absence. Christmas gifts were purchased, including one for Jonah that I knew would likely remain wrapped. New Year came and went, marking nearly 3 months of silence. Then Amara called with news that both relieved and disturbed me. Jonah's starting a YouTube channel for the collective. He's back online. I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this phase was ending. Not personally. The channel is for Harmony Hollow's educational outreach. At least I'll be able to see him, I said. Make sure he's okay. Mom. Amara's voice held a warning. Don't turn this into surveillance. If he finds out you're monitoring him, it will only push him further away. I'm his mother. I have a right to know if he's safe and healthy. He is. I've spoken to him. He's healthier and happier than I've ever seen him. You've spoken to him? The betrayal stung fresh. Recently, last week. And before you ask, yes, I've known how to contact him all along. He asked me not to share that information with you until he was ready. Ready for what? To forgive his mother for caring about his well-being? No, Amara said gently. Ready to establish a relationship with you that doesn't involve you trying to control his life. I ended the call abruptly, hands shaking with anger and hurt. My own children conspiring behind my back. Jonah rejecting everything I'd tried to give him. The unfairness of it all overwhelmed me. That night, I found the YouTube channel. Harmony Hollow Collective had uploaded their first video, a 15-minute introduction to their food sovereignty mission. And there was my son, thinner, bearded, dressed in simple clothing, standing in a field of vegetables and speaking with quiet conviction about sustainable agriculture. I'm Elder Flame, he said to the camera, the name no longer sounding strange in his voice. Welcome to our journey toward healing our relationship with food, land, and community. I watched the entire video, then watched it again. He looked healthy. His eyes were clear, his movements deliberate and calm. He spoke with authority about soil health and seed saving. This was not the frantic energy of someone having a breakdown. This was something else entirely. My son had become a stranger to me. A stranger who called himself Elder Flame and lived on a farm in Oregon and seemed infuriatingly at peace with his choices. I closed my laptop and poured a glass of wine. Something had to be done. This distance couldn't continue. If Jonah wouldn't come to me, perhaps it was time for me to go to him. I became obsessed with finding him. Late nights found me hunched over my laptop, searching for any trace of my son in his new identity. The YouTube channel was just the beginning. Once I knew what to look for, I discovered mentions of Harmony Hollow in sustainable agriculture forums, food justice blogs, even an article in a small Oregon newspaper about innovative farming collectives changing rural economies. None of these sources provided what I really wanted: detailed information about the inner workings of this community that had claimed my son. Were they truly as benign as they appeared? Or was there something darker beneath the surface? Something that explained Jonah's complete personality transformation and estrangement from his family? My academic training served me well as I systematically built a research file. I created a spreadsheet tracking every mention of Harmony Hollow online, noting dates, contexts, and associated individuals. I saved screenshots of group photos, scanning for Jonah's face among the smiling farmers. I watched their YouTube videos repeatedly, analyzing background details for clues about their living conditions. Finally, a hit: a website for Harmony Hollow Collective featuring grainy photos of bearded young people tending gardens. The About Us page described their mission: a regenerative agriculture community practicing food sovereignty through sustainable farming, education, and mutual aid. There was a section on their core values that included phrases like radical transparency and intentional community building. And there he was in a group photo beside a newly constructed greenhouse. Thinner, tanned, with eyes clearer than I'd seen since his childhood. The caption identified him as Elder Flame Food Systems Coordinator. He looked happy. Disgustingly, radiantly happy. The site described their various programs: farming apprenticeships, food preservation workshops, community-supported agriculture shares. Nothing overtly alarming, though the language was steeped in the pseudo-spiritual jargon that had infected Jonah's vocabulary before his disappearance. They spoke of healing our relationship with the land and honoring traditional foodways. What disturbed me most wasn't the farming or even the communal housing described under life at Harmony Hollow. It was their radical transparency, practice, weekly therapy sessions live-streamed for anyone to watch. According to their website, this was part of their commitment to dismantling hierarchical power structures through vulnerable authenticity. I found myself viewing one, stomach churning as strangers processed childhood trauma while viewers left supportive comments. In this particular session, a young woman discussed her difficult relationship with her father, tears streaming down her face as she described his constant criticism and impossibly high standards. "He could never see me," she said. "Only the version of me he wanted me to be." The group facilitator, an older man with a gray beard, nodded sagely. "The parent wound is deep for many of us. Healing often requires creating boundaries with family systems that don't respect our authentic selves." I closed the video profoundly uncomfortable. Was Jonah participating in these public confessionals? Was he discussing me, describing me as some sort of emotional tyrant who had wounded him? The thought was unbearable, yet he never appeared in these sessions. I watched several more, but my son was conspicuously absent from the vulnerability circus. Instead, I found his new video series, Nourishment as Resistance. Gone were the stylized Instagram aesthetics. Instead, simple demonstrations of preserving techniques, bread making, foraging. He looked centered, purposeful. "Today we're harvesting mushrooms that grow naturally on our land," he explained to the camera. "In capitalist food systems, these would be luxury items. Here, their Sunday dinner." He moved with confidence through the forest, identifying fungi with Latin names and traditional uses. His knowledge was impressive, clearly built over months of serious study. This wasn't dilettantism, it was expertise, hard-won and practical. In another video, he demonstrated fermentation techniques, his hands steady as he packed vegetables into large crocks. Fermentation is an ancient preservation method that industrial food systems have largely abandoned, he explained. But beyond preservation, it creates living foods rich in probiotics that support our microbiome. He spoke with quiet authority, neither the frenetic energy of his early food videos nor the academic detachment of his marketing presentations. This was something new, a calm confidence that reminded me uncomfortably of my late husband. In the comments, viewers asked questions that he answered thoughtfully. A community was forming around these videos, people sharing their own experiments with fermenting and foraging. My son had followers, not in the shallow social media sense, but people genuinely learning from him. I couldn't reconcile this capable, knowledgeable man with the lost soul I'd imagined was being manipulated by a cult. The cognitive dissonance was profound. Either Harmony Hollow was not what I feared, or the indoctrination was far more sophisticated than I'd anticipated. Only one way to know for certain. I booked a flight to Oregon without telling anyone. Rented a car. Found the unmarked dirt road that Google Maps claimed led to Harmony Hollow. The drive was beautiful, winding through forests and meadows, past small farms and isolated homes. The collective was located on 40 acres outside a town so small it barely registered on maps. April in Oregon was lush, everything vibrant green and flowering. As I drove the final miles on an increasingly rough road, I rehearsed what I would say. I would be calm, rational. I would express concern rather than judgment. I would listen more than speak. A hand-painted sign greeted me. Private property, visitors by invitation only. I ignored it. The road opened to a clearing where several vehicles were parked, mostly older models, one converted to run on biodiesel according to its bumper sticker. Beyond, I could see a cluster of buildings, some traditional farmhouses, others clearly newer construction built with sustainable materials. A large garden spread across several acres, where people worked among neat rows of early spring crops. Solar panels gleamed on rooftops. Chickens pecked freely in a fenced area. It looked, I had to admit, rather idyllic. I parked beside a vintage Volvo and stepped out, smoothing my linen dress and adjusting my statement necklace. I dressed carefully for this confrontation, choosing clothing that projected authority while still acknowledging the rustic setting. Before I reached the main path, a young woman with dreadlocks stopped me. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Jonah, Elder Flame," I corrected myself, the name feeling ridiculous in my mouth. She studied me with open curiosity. "Do you have an invitation? I'm his mother." Her expression shifted, not to welcome but to wariness. "Please wait here." She disappeared into a straw-bale structure. Minutes later, a different person emerged, older with a gray beard. The man from the therapy sessions, I realized. "Some kind of leader here, Dr. Calhoun. Elder Flame has asked me to tell you he's not available to meet." "That's absurd. I flew across the country." "Without invitation or notice," the man said gently. "Boundaries are sacred here. I need to see my son." "He's not ready for that interaction. Perhaps next time contact him first. He checks his email on Fridays." "You can't keep me from my own child," I said, my composure slipping. "No one's keeping anyone from anything. This is his decision, which we respect, as we would respect your decision about who enters your home." His calm reasonableness inflamed me further. "Is he being coerced, manipulated? What exactly are you people doing here?" The man's expression remained compassionate but firm. "Dr. Calhoun, I understand your concern. As a parent myself, I know the fear when children choose paths different from what we envisioned. But Elder Flame is a 30-year-old man making conscious choices about his life and relationships. His name is Jonah," I insisted. "That's not what he calls himself now." We stood at an impasse, this stranger and I, both claiming to respect my son's autonomy while projecting our own expectations onto him. "Will you at least tell him I came?" I finally asked. "That I'm concerned about him." "He knows you're here," the man said. "And he knows you care in your way. He's just not ready to engage directly. I encourage you to respect that boundary." As the man escorted me back to my car, I caught a glimpse through an open door, a communal kitchen where people worked together preparing food. Among them stood my son, laughing as he kneaded dough, a person I didn't recognize leaning affectionately against him. He looked happy. The realization stung worse than if he'd been miserable. The gray-bearded man saw me looking. He's doing well here, finding purpose. Building healthy relationships. With people who encourage him to reject his family. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. No one has encouraged that, quite the opposite. We believe healed family relationships are possible, but they require mutual respect and clear boundaries. I wanted to argue further, to demand they produce my son immediately, but the quiet dignity of the place and its people made such histrionics seem childish. Instead, I got into my rental car with what remained of my composure. "When he's ready to speak with me, please let him know I'll listen," I said, a concession that cost me dearly. The bearded man nodded. "I will. Safe travels, Dr. Calhoun." I drove away feeling hollowed out. I'd come expecting to rescue my son from a cult and instead found him apparently thriving in a community that, while alien to my values, seemed neither exploitative nor dangerous. The narrative I'd constructed, of Jonah being brainwashed by charismatic leaders, collapsed in the face of what I'd seen. The real story was both simpler and more painful. My son had chosen a life completely different from what I'd planned for him, and he was happier for it. I spent the night in a small hotel in Portland, too emotionally exhausted to change my flight. In the morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my ex-husband. "Evangeline," he answered, surprise evident in his voice. "Everything okay? Have you spoken to Jonah recently?" A pause. "Yes, about 2 weeks ago." The betrayal stung afresh. "He's speaking to you but not me. We text occasionally. He sent me some seeds he thought I'd like for my garden. Did you know he's living in some kind of commune in Oregon, that he's changed his name to Elder Flame?" "Yes to both. The Harmony Hollow Collective. It's actually quite an interesting project. They're doing innovative work with permaculture and community-supported agriculture. Robert, he's living in a commune, using a ridiculous name, completely rejecting everything we raised him to value." "Is he, though?" My ex-husband's voice was infuriatingly calm. "He's using his education to address food insecurity, building community, working toward environmental sustainability. Those sound like values we both tried to instill. Don't be deliberately obtuse. He's thrown away a promising career to play farmer, or he's rejected a career that made him unhappy to build something meaningful." Robert sighed. "Evangeline, you and I have always had different visions for our children. You wanted them to achieve status and security. I wanted them to find purpose and contentment. Maybe Jonah's found his purpose in a cult. Have you visited this place? Spoken to the people there? Or are you just assuming cult because it's different from what you wanted for him?" I was silent, unwilling to admit I'd done exactly that. "Look," Robert continued more gently, "I know this is difficult for you. You've always had such specific plans for the kids, but they're adults now making their own choices, even choices we don't understand." "He won't even speak to me," I said, hiding the vulnerability in my voice. "Maybe because he knows you don't respect his choices. When was the last time you asked about his life without judgment or criticism?" The question hit harder than I expected. I couldn't remember. "Just something to think about," Robert said. "For what it's worth, he asks about you, wants to know you're okay." I ended the call shortly after, unsettled by the conversation. The idea that Jonah inquired about me while maintaining his distance complicated my narrative of complete rejection. Back in Charleston, I crafted my narrative carefully. When colleagues inquired about Jonah, I sighed dramatically. "He's finding himself. It's a difficult time." The sympathy was intoxicating. I was cast as the patient, progressive mother supporting her confused child through a regrettable detour. No need to mention communes or name changes or public rejections. Just a knowing look, a gentle shake of the head. You know how young people are today, so unsure of their place in the world. No one needed to know I'd flown across the country only to be turned away from my son's new home. No one needed to know he was happier without me than he'd ever been with me. No one needed to know the hollow ache that had taken up residence in my chest, the creeping fear that I had somehow failed him profoundly. Instead, I channeled my energy into research. I read books on intentional communities, sustainable agriculture, food sovereignty. I watched documentaries about alternative living arrangements. I tried to understand the world that had claimed my son, approaching it with the same academic rigor I'd applied to indigenous cultures in my professional work. What I found was not what I expected. Many of these communities were well organized, economically viable, and socially healthy. They operated successful businesses, participated in local governance, maintained relationships with surrounding communities. They weren't dropping out so much as creating alternatives, parallel systems based on different values. I wasn't ready to concede that Harmony Hollow was one of these functional communities, but my research opened the possibility that Jonah hadn't succumbed to indoctrination. Perhaps he'd made a rational, if unexpected, choice based on values I'd failed to recognize in him. The thought was both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because it suggested he wasn't being manipulated. Disturbing because it meant our estrangement stemmed from genuine differences rather than outside influence. It was harder to dismiss his choices as temporary confusion if they were, in fact, conscious decisions aligned with deeply held beliefs. Then came the Trader Joe's incident. I was examining organic kale when someone touched my arm. Dr. Calhoun. Madison stood there, glowing with newlywed happiness, her left hand weighted with a tasteful diamond. Madison, how lovely to see you. I embraced her, inhaling her expensive perfume. How's married life treating you? It's wonderful. David is amazing. She hesitated. Have you heard from Jonah? I saw on a friend's social media he's living in Oregon now. I arranged my face into maternal concern. Yes, he's joined some sort of commune. It's a difficult time. We're giving him space to work through this phase. Madison frowned slightly. A commune, is it that sustainable farming collective? I saw some of his videos. He seemed really at peace. Videos? You're still following him? Not directly, but a college friend shared his series on indigenous food preservation. It was actually really educational. I tightened my grip on my shopping basket. Well, appearances can be deceiving online. Between us, I'm quite concerned. Madison studied me with unexpected perception. That's interesting. He seemed happier in his last post than I've ever seen him, even when we were together. She smiled politely. Please tell him I said hello if you speak to him. If the conditional stung, I changed the subject. And how's the practice going? Your husband's, I mean. David's doing well. We're actually opening a second office next month. She glanced at her watch. I should get going. It was nice seeing you, Dr. Calhoun. As she walked away, I felt oddly diminished. Madison, whom I'd pitied for being left behind by Jonah's evolution, seemed genuinely happy in her conventional life. And more disconcertingly, she didn't seem to view Jonah's choices with the same alarm I did. Was I the only one who saw his transformation as a crisis rather than a journey? The thought was isolating. That night, I watched more of Harmony Hollow's videos, paying closer attention to the content rather than just searching for glimpses of Jonah. They were teaching practical skills: food preservation, seed saving, fermentation. They discussed the economics of small-scale farming, the challenges of building food systems outside corporate agriculture. There was spirituality in their approach, certainly, but it was grounded in tangible actions rather than abstract beliefs. In one video, Jonah demonstrated how to create a vegetable garden in small spaces, building raised beds from reclaimed materials. Food sovereignty begins with growing what you can where you are, he explained. Even a windowsill can become a source of nourishment. His hands moved with confidence, his instructions clear and practical. This wasn't the work of someone lost in delusion. This was expertise shared generously. The comments section was filled with questions and gratitude. Elder Flame's videos helped me start growing food for my family. This technique saved my tomatoes last summer. Thank you for making this knowledge accessible. My son was helping people, creating concrete positive change in their lives, contributing something measurable to the world. Had I been wrong about everything, I channeled my frustration into productivity. A former colleague invited me to guest on her podcast about modern parenting challenges. Without naming names, I discussed a case study of a young man who'd abandoned his potential to join what I strongly implied was a cult. We're seeing this pattern more frequently, I explained in my most authoritative academic voice. Young people from privileged backgrounds rejecting conventional success to pursue what they perceive as more authentic lifestyles. What do you think that is? My colleague asked. Digital burnout, certainly, economic anxieties. But I believe there's also an element of performative rebellion. These aren't genuine revolutionaries, they're playing at revolution while maintaining safety nets. Most eventually return to conventional paths when the realities of alternative living become clear. My colleague nodded thoughtfully. And as parents, how should we respond to these experimental phases? With patience but firmness, I said, thinking of my own situation. Maintain boundaries, offer support without enabling self-destructive choices, and keep communication open for when they're ready to reconnect. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on me. I was positioning myself as an expert on a situation I was failing to navigate in my own life. But the authoritative framing helped me process my confusion, transforming my personal pain into professional insight. I posted cryptic Facebook updates. Sometimes loving your children means letting them make mistakes. Motherhood hard chases, the comments poured in. You're so strong, Evangeline. Sending prayers. Children always come back to their mothers eventually. I believed this last one most fervently. He would return, chastened by reality. I would forgive him graciously. My social media performance was convincing. Friends and colleagues approached me at university functions, touching my arm with sympathetic looks. "How are you holding up?" they'd ask, as if I were enduring some terrible illness rather than a willful child's rebellion. I perfected my response, a brave smile, a slight tilt of the head. Taking it day by day. These challenges only make us stronger. The narrative I'd constructed was so compelling that I almost believed it myself. Almost, then the package arrived from Oregon. I recognized his handwriting immediately, though the return address said simply Harmony Hollow Collective with no individual name. The package was surprisingly heavy, carefully wrapped in brown paper and secured with twine rather than tape, a detail that irritated me with its self-conscious eco-consciousness. I opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. Inside was a book. Not a mass-produced volume, but something handcrafted, bound in cloth the color of fertile soil. The cover bore a simple embossed title, Nourishment, Feeding the Body, Mind, and Community by Elder Flame and the Harmony Hollow Collective. The book was beautiful, printed on recycled paper with a texture that invited touch. Full-color photographs of gardens, prepared dishes, and people working together complemented the text. It was divided into sections: growing food, preserving the harvest, cooking with seasonal ingredients, sharing meals as community practice. I leafed through pages of recipes interspersed with essays on food sovereignty and community building. The photography was stunning: vibrant gardens, communal meals, my son teaching children to plant seeds. His writing was clear, knowledgeable, occasionally poetic when describing the satisfaction of harvesting food you'd grown or the complexity of flavors in fermented vegetables. No mention of me. No dedication. No acknowledgement of the education I'd provided or the cultural literacy I'd instilled in him. A simple note accompanied it. "I found my path. I hope someday you'll understand. Not I miss you, or I forgive you, or even I'm angry with you." Just a statement of his reality and a tentative bridge extended across our divide. I placed it on my coffee table as a conversation piece. "My son's little project," I told visitors with indulgent affection. Most expressed appropriate admiration, complimenting the photography or the sustainable printing methods. Few actually read any of the content, which suited me fine. The book was a prop in my performance of supportive motherhood, not a text to be engaged with seriously. Then my youngest daughter Zora stopped by unexpectedly. "Is that Jonah's book?" She picked it up reverently. "He sent me a copy too. It's incredible." "You've spoken to him?" I tried to mask my hurt. "We all have, Mom, me, Amara, even Madison sometimes. All of you, but he won't answer my calls." Zora sat down, her expression serious. "Because you've never accepted any of us unless we followed your script. That's absurd. I've always encouraged your independence. As long as our independence matched your definition of success." She took a deep breath. "Mom, Jonah is thriving. The collective just got a grant to expand their education programs. He's teaching at-risk youth about sustainable agriculture. He's in a committed relationship with someone who shares his values. He wouldn't even see me when I went there, I said, hearing the petulance in my voice but unable to stop it. You showed up unannounced to a community that explicitly requires invitations. That's exactly the boundary-crossing behavior he needed to escape. The accusation stung with its precision. I just want what's best for him. No, Zora said gently. You want what's best for your image of him. I looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the truth in her words. This whole situation is ridiculous. He's calling himself Elder Flame, for heaven's sake. And you renamed yourself when you got your doctorate, Zora pointed out. Insisted everyone call you doctor instead of miss or even professor. Names matter. They reflect how we see ourselves and how we want others to see us. That's completely different, I protested. A professional title is earned through years of rigorous academic work. And Jonah's name was earned through his own journey. It might seem silly to you, but it has meaning to him. I changed tactics. What about his career, his future security? This farming commune can't last forever. He has a career. Several, actually. He's a farmer, an educator, a writer. The collective has health insurance through a cooperative. They're financially stable and growing. This isn't some fly-by-night operation, Mom. They have a 5-year plan and sustainable revenue streams. The thought that Jonah's alternative lifestyle might actually be viable long-term was somehow more threatening than the idea of it being a temporary phase. A phase would end. He would return to conventional success. But if this new path could provide stability and fulfillment, what would bring him back to the life I'd envisioned for him? Zora seemed to read my thoughts. He's not coming back to corporate marketing, Mom. This isn't a detour, it's his chosen road. I felt suddenly tired. Then why send me this book? What does he want from me? I think he wants you to see him as he is, not as you want him to be. To respect his choices even if you don't understand them. And if I can't, she stood up resolute. We've talked, all three of us. Either accept Jonah for who he is, or you'll lose the rest of us too. We're done pretending your way is the only valid path. After she left, I sat alone in my beautifully curated living room, surrounded by artifacts from my distinguished career. The silence felt different now, not a temporary absence but a permanent possibility. Spent months constructing a narrative where I was the patient mother waiting for her confused son to return to reason. But what if he wasn't confused? What if he had found his true path, and I was the one clinging to illusion? The academic in me recognized the paradigm shift required. I would need to recontextualize my understanding of success, achievement, even family itself. The mother in me recoiled from this challenge, wanting instead to reclaim what was familiar and comfortable. I picked up Jonah's book again, this time reading it properly rather than merely skimming for evidence to support my preconceptions. The voice in the text was thoughtful, knowledgeable, passionate about creating sustainable food systems that served communities rather than corporations. In one essay, he wrote, "True nourishment isn't just about filling stomachs, it's about feeding connections between people, land, and traditional knowledge. When we grow food together, preserve it together, and share meals together, we create resilience that industrial systems cannot replicate." I could hear echoes of my own academic work in his writing, elements of discourse on cultural preservation and resistance to homogenization. But he had taken these abstract concepts and applied them concretely, physically. He was living what I had only theorized. There was wisdom in that, a wisdom I had not given him credit for. That night I called my ex-husband again. "Robert, be honest with me. Am I really so controlling that our children feel they can't be themselves around me?" His silence was answer enough. "That's not fair," I said. "I've supported their education, their ambitions. As long as those ambitions aligned with your vision," he replied gently. "Evangeline, you've always had specific ideas about what success looks like. When the kids color outside those lines, you take it as personal rejection. Because it is rejection. Jonah has rejected everything I tried to give him. Or he's taken what you gave him and applied it in ways you didn't anticipate. His values, his sense of justice, his intellectual curiosity, those came from you as much as from me. He's your son, Evangeline. He just doesn't want to be your clone." The conversation lingered with me for days. Was I truly so rigid? Had I mistaken my own ambitions for my children's best interests? I began cataloging my interactions with all three of my children, looking for patterns. How often had I dismissed their interests if those interests didn't align with my notion of success? How frequently had I framed career decisions as binary choices between achievement and failure, with achievement defined solely by my metrics? The evidence was uncomfortably clear. I had been the architect of a narrative where my children's value was measured by how closely they adhered to my blueprint for their lives. No wonder Jonah had fled across the country and changed his name. It was the only way to draft his own blueprints. The realization was painful, but also oddly freeing. If I had been wrong about how to parent adult children, I could learn to be right. I could adapt, evolve, grow alongside them rather than demand they conform to my static expectations. I began by reading everything I could find about Harmony Hollow and similar communities. Not with the skeptical eye of before, looking for evidence of cult-like manipulation, but with genuine curiosity about the principles that had drawn my son to this life. Their values were not so different from what I claimed to believe. Sustainability, community responsibility, economic justice, respect for traditional knowledge. The difference was implementation. I had built an academic career analyzing these concepts. Jonah was attempting to live them daily. There was courage in that practical application that I had to respect, even if his methods seemed radical to me. I watched more of his videos, this time paying attention to the content rather than just searching for signs of exploitation or distress. In one, he demonstrated a traditional method of preserving tomatoes that he'd learned from an elder in the local indigenous community. Maria taught me that food preservation isn't just about extending the harvest, he explained, his hands working competently with the bright red fruits. It's about carrying cultural memory forward. Each jar contains not just tomatoes, but stories, techniques refined over generations, connections to those who fed their families this way before industrial canning existed. His respect for the knowledge he was sharing was evident, as was his care to credit its source. This wasn't appropriation, it was precisely the kind of cultural exchange and preservation I had advocated for in my academic work. My son was implementing the theories I had spent decades developing, and doing it well. The irony was not lost on me. I began to consider how to rebuild our relationship. Not by expecting him to return to his former self, but by accepting who he had become. Not by waiting for him to admit I was right, but by acknowledging that there were many forms of right in this world. I recalled something from my earliest research in cultural anthropology. The most profound learning comes not from studying cultures that mirror our own, but from engaging with those that challenge our fundamental assumptions. Perhaps Jonah was offering me that kind of learning opportunity, if I could overcome my reflexive resistance. The process would not be easy. It would require dismantling deeply held beliefs about success, status, achievement, even parental authority itself. It would mean accepting that my son had found meaningful work and community that didn't align with my expectations, but nonetheless provided him with purpose and joy. Most difficult of all, it would require admitting that I had been wrong. Not just about Jonah's choices, but about my approach to parenting adult children generally. I hadn't been prepared for this particular midlife education. I had expected to be the teacher, not the student, in my relationships with my children. Yet here I was, confronting the limitations of my understanding and the rigidity of my expectations. The book Jonah had sent remained on my coffee table, no longer as a prop in my performance of concerned motherhood, but as a genuine connection to my son's new life. I began trying the recipes, first the simpler ones, then the more complex fermentations and preserving methods. My first batches were disastrous. Pickles too salty, bread dense as a brick, kombucha that smelled vaguely of feet. But I persisted, following his detailed instructions, learning the rhythm and intuition required for these traditional techniques. It was humbling. I, with my multiple degrees and distinguished career, struggled with tasks that generations of ordinary people had performed as part of daily life. There was knowledge here that couldn't be gained from books or lectures, only from practice and observation and patience. With each failed attempt and eventual success, I gained new respect for what Jonah was doing. This wasn't playing at farming or performing sustainability for social media. This was skilled work requiring intelligence, persistence, and a kind of embodied knowledge I had undervalued. One night I opened Jonah's cookbook to a random page. A recipe for fermented hot sauce stared back at me. Simple ingredients, complex process, beautiful result. I went to my kitchen and began gathering components. The peppers weren't local, the garlic not organic. My technique was clumsy. But as I chopped and mixed, following my son's careful instructions, something shifted. 3 weeks later, I opened the jar of hot sauce. The fermentation had transformed the raw ingredients into something complex, alive, unpredictable. I tasted it cautiously. It was revelatory. Layers of flavor, deep heat that bloomed rather than burned, a tanginess that made my tongue tingle. I had created something genuinely delicious by trusting a process I couldn't fully control or predict. Perhaps there was a metaphor in there somewhere about parenting and acceptance. I took a photograph and with trembling fingers created a new email address. I attached the image and wrote, "Dear Elder Flame, I made your hot sauce recipe. It's unlike anything I've tasted before. I'd like to understand more if you're willing to teach me. With respect, your mother." I wasn't entirely comfortable addressing my son by his chosen name, but respect required acknowledging his self-definition, however strange it seemed to me. This small concession felt like a significant step. I pressed send before I could reconsider, then set my phone aside, not expecting an immediate response, if any. He checked email on Fridays, according to the bearded man at the collective, and today was Tuesday. To my surprise, a response came within hours. "The hot sauce looks good. Nice color. Did you use fresh or dried peppers?" Such a simple question, yet it opened a door. Not flinging it wide with grand reconciliation, but cracking it just enough to allow a sliver of light between our separate worlds. I replied with details about my process, admitting my failures and surprises along the way. The fermentation took longer than I expected. I wasn't sure if it had gone bad or was supposed to smell that way. "Fermentation teaches patience," he responded. "And trust in processes we can't fully see. The microorganisms know what they're doing if we create the right conditions and then step back." Was he speaking only of hot sauce? It didn't matter. We were communicating without accusation or defense, finding neutral territory in the alchemy of peppers and salt. Our exchange continued, focused entirely on food preservation. No mention of our conflict, his name change, my visit to the collective, or the ultimatum from his sisters. Just questions and answers about techniques, ingredients, traditions. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. A small, tentative bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. I printed his emails and added them to the notebook where I was documenting my culinary experiments. My colleagues would have been astounded to see Dr. Evangeline Calhoun, renowned cultural anthropologist, meticulously recording the progress of fermenting cabbage or the proper technique for folding sourdough. But there was a kind of peace in this concrete learning, this tacit knowledge that couldn't be gained from academic papers or theoretical frameworks. My hands were learning what my mind had resisted, that there were forms of wisdom outside my experience, and my son had found his way to them before I had. After she left, I sat alone in my beautifully curated living room, surrounded by artifacts from my distinguished career. The silence felt different now, not a temporary absence but a permanent possibility. That night, I opened Jonah's cookbook to a random page. A recipe for fermented hot sauce stared back at me. Simple ingredients, complex process, beautiful result. I went to my kitchen and began gathering components. The peppers weren't local, the garlic not organic. My technique was clumsy. But as I chopped and mixed, following my son's careful instructions, something shifted. 3 weeks later, I opened the jar of hot sauce. The fermentation had transformed the raw ingredients into something complex, alive, unpredictable. I tasted it cautiously. It was revelatory. I took a photograph and with trembling fingers created a new email address. I attached the image and wrote, "Dear Elder Flame, I made your hot sauce recipe. It's unlike anything I've tasted before. I'd like to understand more if you're willing to teach me. With respect, your mother." 2 days later, a response. "The fermentation teaches patience. The heat teaches respect. Would you like to learn more?" A video call link followed. I spent the morning preparing for this conversation as meticulously as I once prepared for academic conferences. I dressed carefully in a simple linen shirt rather than my usual statement jewelry and designer pieces. I arranged my background to be neutral, removing the academic awards and cultural artifacts that usually surrounded me like protective talismans. I clicked the link at precisely the scheduled time, heart racing with an anxiety I hadn't felt since my dissertation defense decades ago. The screen remained dark for several seconds, then flickered to life. His face appeared, bearded, weathered by sun, eyes clear. Behind him, morning light filtered through windows onto a communal workspace. Several large crocks lined wooden shelves, presumably filled with fermenting vegetables. A bundle of herbs hung drying from the ceiling. "Hello, Mother," he said. Not warm, not cold. Present, I had prepared a speech but found myself simply saying, "I'd like to listen this time." He nodded, picked up a jar similar to mine, and began to teach. "Fermentation is about relationship," he explained. "Between you and the microorganisms, between the vegetables and the salt, between past traditions and present needs. Nothing exists in isolation." He showed me his current projects: kimchi, sauerkraut, preserved lemons. Each represented a different cultural tradition, a different approach to preservation. As he spoke about the techniques, I recognized elements of my own academic framework: cultural transmission, adaptive practices, indigenous knowledge systems, now applied to tangible, edible results. "Your hot sauce looks good," he said, examining the photo I'd sent. "The color is vibrant. Did you use fresh or dried chilies?" "Fresh, from the farmer's market, though I doubt they were grown within 5 miles." A hint of a smile. "The practice matters more than the purity. We work with what we have where we are." I found myself relaxing as we discussed fermentation techniques. This was communication without accusation or defense, finding neutral territory in the alchemy of peppers and salt. Our call ended after 30 minutes, neither too short to be dismissive nor too long to be exhausting. We agreed to speak again the following week. I would try making sauerkraut. He would guide me through the process. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. A small, tentative bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. Our weekly calls continued, focused entirely on food preservation. No mention of our conflict, his name change, my visit to the collective, or the ultimatum from his sisters. Just questions and answers about techniques, ingredients, traditions. I found myself looking forward to these sessions, planning my week around them. My colleagues would have been astounded to see Dr. Evangeline Calhoun, renowned cultural anthropologist, meticulously recording the progress of fermenting cabbage or the proper technique for folding sourdough. But there was a kind of peace in this concrete learning, this tacit knowledge that couldn't be gained from academic papers or theoretical frameworks. My hands were learning what my mind had resisted, that there were forms of wisdom outside my experience, and my son had found his way to them before I had. After 2 months of these calls, he asked me a question that wasn't about fermentation. "Mom, why did you really call me?" I considered deflecting but opted for honesty. "Zora told me that either I accept you as you are or I lose all 3 of you." He nodded, unsurprised. "That sounds like Zora, direct." "She said you're all tired of pretending my way is the only valid path." "It's exhausting," he agreed. "Being around someone who constantly judges your choices against a rubric you didn't agree to." Was I really so controlling? His expression softened slightly. "You wanted the best for us, but you defined best very narrowly. I wanted you to have security, recognition, the things I had to fight for." "I know, but security looks different to my generation. The paths that worked for you aren't guaranteed for us." We're facing different challenges, making different calculations. I hadn't considered this perspective, that my children's generation might need to pioneer new approaches to security and fulfillment because the old models were failing them. Tell me about Harmony Hollow, I said. Not the theory, the daily reality. What's it actually like to live there? For the first time, he smiled fully. It's hard work, physically demanding, emotionally challenging. Community living isn't easy. We have conflicts, misunderstandings, but it's also deeply satisfying. I wake up knowing exactly why my work matters and who it serves. He described their daily routines, early mornings in the gardens, food preparation for the community, educational programs for visitors, consensus-based decision-making processes. It sounded exhausting but purposeful. And your partner, Willow, was it? Cedar, he corrected. We've been together almost a year now. She coordinates our educational programs. Is it serious? Another smile. Yes, though not in ways you might recognize. We're committed to each other and to the community. It's not marriage in the conventional sense, but it's deeply intentional. I wanted to ask more, but sensed this territory was still tender between us. Instead, I returned to safer ground. I'd like to try making kimchi next if you'll teach me. Our calls gradually expanded beyond fermentation. We discussed books he was reading, projects at the collective, even occasionally politics, though we tread carefully there, both aware of potential landmines. I never directly apologized for my harsh words the night he left or my unannounced visit to Harmony Hollow. He never explicitly forgave me, but something was healing between us slowly, like the invisible transformation of vegetables in brine. 3 months into our reconciliation, he made an unexpected offer. We're hosting a harvest festival next month. 3 days of workshops, shared meals, celebration. If you'd like to come, you'd be welcome as my guest. An invitation. Official, proper, respecting the collective's boundaries while opening a door for me. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. I approached this visit differently than my first attempt. I booked a room at a small inn in the nearby town rather than expecting accommodation at the collective. I packed simple, practical clothing instead of my usual curated wardrobe. I left my academic credentials and professional armor at home. The drive to Harmony Hollow felt different this time, less like a rescue mission and more like a genuine exploration. The October landscape was magnificent, trees ablaze with autumn colors, fields golden with harvest. At the entrance, the same hand-painted sign greeted me, private property, visitors by invitation only. This time I had an invitation. This time I belonged. Jonah met me at the parking area, dressed simply in work clothes, a wool hat pulled over his hair against the autumn chill. "Welcome, Mom," he said, embracing me briefly. He looked healthy, strong. His beard was neatly trimmed now, his eyes clear and direct. This was not someone being exploited or controlled. This was a man who had found his purpose. "Thank you for inviting me," I said, meaning it sincerely. The festival was unlike any academic conference or cultural event I'd attended. Workshops on everything from seed saving to natural building techniques. Shared meals prepared from the collective's harvest. Music around campfires in the evening. Children running freely between activities, contributing to tasks appropriate to their ages. I participated awkwardly at first, acutely aware of being an outsider, the oldest person in many groups, the least knowledgeable about practical skills. But the community welcomed me with surprising warmth, especially once they realized I was Elder Flame's mother. "Your son is an amazing teacher," one young woman told me as we peeled apples for sauce. "He helped me understand food systems in ways my 4 years of college never did. He's transformed our fermentation program," an older man added. "Brought traditional techniques from cultures around the world." Pride and emotion I hadn't associated with Jonah in many months bloomed unexpectedly. My son had built something here, not what I would have chosen for him, but something valuable nonetheless. On my second day, I attended his workshop on decolonizing preservation techniques. I sat in the back, observing as he led a diverse group through the historical context and practical application of various food preservation methods. Western food science didn't invent preservation, he explained, confidently addressing the group. Indigenous and traditional communities worldwide developed sophisticated techniques tailored to their environments and available resources. When we reclaim these methods, we're not just preserving food, we're preserving cultural knowledge that industrial systems have nearly erased. It could have been my lecture. The theoretical framework, the historical analysis, the emphasis on cultural sovereignty, these were concepts I'd spent my career developing. But Jonah had taken them from abstract academic discourse into living practice. As the group dispersed to their hands-on activities, he approached me. "What did you think?" "It was excellent," I said honestly. "You've integrated theory and practice beautifully." "I had a good teacher for the theory part," he said, and I realized he meant me. That evening, over a community dinner featuring foods preserved from previous harvests alongside fresh autumn vegetables, Cedar approached me. Up close, she was older than I'd initially thought, perhaps in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence. "Elder Flame speaks of you often," she said, joining me at a quieter table. "Your work on cultural preservation informed much of our approach here." I didn't realize my academic papers had such practical applications, I admitted. "Knowledge should serve life," she said simply. "That's what we're attempting here, to align theory with lived experience." We talked for over an hour. She had a master's degree in environmental education, had worked in nonprofits before burning out, had found Harmony Hollow during her own search for more sustainable ways of living and working. She wasn't what I'd imagined for my son's partner. Then again, neither was he what I'd imagined for my son. But I could see their connection, the shared vision and complementary skills. There was love there, certainly, but also partnership in a larger purpose. On my final morning, Jonah invited me to help harvest the last of the season's tomatoes before the expected frost. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the repetitive task creating a meditative space between us. "I don't fully understand your life here," I said finally. "But I can see that it brings you joy." "That's enough," he said. "Understanding can come with time. Acceptance is what matters now." "I do accept you," I said, the words feeling both inadequate and enormous. "I'm learning to anyway." He nodded, selecting a perfectly ripe tomato and placing it gently in his basket. "That's all any of us can do, learn as we go." As I prepared to leave, he handed me a small wooden crate filled with preserved foods from the collective. Jars of pickles and sauerkraut, dried herbs, fermented hot sauce, apple butter. "To continue your education at home," he said with a small smile. "Will you visit Charleston?" I asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. "Your sisters miss you." "Eventually," he said. "We're busy through winter preparation, but perhaps in spring. It would be good to reconnect with everyone." It wasn't a promise, but it was possibility. I would take it. The drive back to the airport gave me time to reflect. My son was not returning to the path I'd envisioned for him. He would not reclaim his birth name, resume his marketing career, marry conventionally, or pursue the markers of success I'd defined. He had chosen a different way, and it was working for him, more difficult to admit. Perhaps he had chosen a better way, at least for him. A life with purpose, community, direct impact. Work that aligned with his deepest values rather than compromising them for comfort or status. I had raised him to think critically, to question systems of oppression, to value authenticity and justice. I just hadn't expected him to apply those teachings so literally, so thoroughly, that they would lead him away from me. But they hadn't, not completely. We had found our way back to each other, not through his capitulation to my expectations, but through my gradual acceptance of his autonomy. Not perfect, not complete, but a beginning. Back in Charleston, I made changes. Small at first, then more significant. I cleared space in my garden for vegetables instead of merely ornamental plants. I converted a spare room into a preservation pantry, shelves gradually filling with my experiments in fermentation and canning. I invited Zora and Amara for dinner and served homemade sauerkraut alongside traditional dishes. Their surprise and approval warmed me. "You've been learning from Jonah," Zora observed. "We've been learning from each other," I corrected gently. My colleagues noticed changes too. In faculty meetings, I found myself advocating for more applied components in our curriculum, more engagement with communities outside academia. I proposed a course on traditional knowledge systems in contemporary practice and invited guest speakers from indigenous communities and sustainable agriculture projects. Some raised eyebrows, but others responded enthusiastically. A senior colleague remarked, "Evangeline is bringing anthropology back to its roots in lived human experience. It's refreshing." I still struggled sometimes. When friends asked about Jonah, I caught myself starting to frame his choices as temporary or transitional before correcting course. My son runs educational programs at a sustainable agriculture collective in Oregon. He's doing important work there. The story I told changed, and with it, my understanding of what constituted success, fulfillment, proper parenting, even family itself. 6 months after my visit to Harmony Hollow, all three of my children gathered in my home for the first time in years. Jonah and Cedar had come east for a conference on food sovereignty and extended their trip to include family time. Amara and Zora rearranged their schedules to overlap with their visit. I prepared a meal using techniques Jonah had taught me, ingredients as local and seasonal as Charleston markets allowed. Not perfect by Harmony Hollow standards, but sincere in intention. As we sat around my dining table, the conversation flowed more easily than I could have imagined a year earlier. No performance of familial harmony, but genuine connection, even when we disagreed. Later, as Jonah and Cedar helped me clean up, he said quietly, "This is nice, Mom. Being here without having to be someone I'm not." "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you clearly," I replied. "We got there eventually," he said. "That's what matters." After they left, I sat in my garden watching the vegetables I'd planted taking root in soil once reserved for ornamental displays. Change was possible even late in life. Growth could happen in unexpected directions. My son would never be what I'd once imagined. He would not follow my prescribed path to success. His name would remain Elder Flame, his home a collective farm in Oregon, his work outside the traditional markers of achievement I'd valued. But he was thriving, contributing, living with integrity and purpose. Perhaps that was a better legacy than any I could have planned. Not the replication of my own journey, but the courage to forge a new one, carrying forward the values without the limitations. I reached for my phone and sent a text. "The tomatoes you helped me plant are coming up strong. They remind me of you." His response came quickly. "Growth takes time and the right condition, so do relationships." Simple words, but containing a wisdom I was still learning. Growth takes time and the right conditions. Sometimes the most nurturing thing we can do is step back, trust the process, and allow transformation to occur in its own way, on its own schedule. My son had taught me that. Not the lesson I expected in my later years, but perhaps the one I needed most.